Hello there, Rebecca and Todd. I'm making this video just for you, perhaps to help you get the most out of your new bread maker. One of the things that I like doing with the bread maker is use a scale instead of a bunch of measuring cups. And I do that for two reasons. The first reason is using a scale means you're going to be more accurate. Instead of measuring volume, which can vary and change, weight is very consistently repeated between batches and between types of ingredients. So if you always weigh, you're going to get the same results guaranteed every time. The other thing I like about weighing is I actually use fewer spoons and measuring cups and things like that. I can pour things directly from the bag right into the bread making pan. So you start off with your scale. The first thing you do is put the bread pan onto the scale before you've turned the scale on. Then you press the power button, and you'll notice when the scale comes up, it reads 0, which is what you want to start with. So when you add an ingredient, you're starting from 0 and you can measure exactly how much to add there. Now in the recipes that I use, I put them all into a spreadsheet where I can kind of quickly glance at the numbers required to make a given kind of bread. And so for my bread maker, probably like yours, there's regular white, there's herb, there's French, Italian. You can add cinnamon raisin and things like that. This is my recipe book, all on one sheet. So I can just grab that real quickly, lay it out on the counter, and then make bread. 5 minutes is my goal. 5 minutes to get it into the pan into the bread machine, and then 3 hours later, I got a loaf of bread. So with the pan on the scale and the scale at 0, I can add an ingredient. In this case, I'm going to add 335 grams of water. So as I do that, you can see I just pour the water in, watch the scale, and as I get close to 335, I'll stop, kind of let the scale catch up a little bit, then add the remaining amount. And ideally, you want to go slow and kind of creep up on the amount. So I went a little over, as you can see. So one thing I'll do is just grab a spoon, dip into the water, pour it back to the cup until I get something close to 35. Now, not everybody needs to be this precise with their recipes. I just happen to like to. All right, so that's how the scales work. Now, when I'm done adding an ingredient, I do one other thing. Most of these scales, hopefully including the one that I sent you, that Mom and I sent you, when you push this button called tare, and every unit may have a different, but I think that's a way of resetting it to 0. So now I have the bread pan and the water in there. So the next ingredient that I add, I'll get just the amount of that ingredient. It won't take into account the pan and the water that I just added. So next for me is flour. So I'm going to pour directly from the bag into this, and I'm trying to get 553 grams of flour. So I'll creep up on that again. And again, if I go over, it's not a big deal. For flour, some of the ingredients, if you go over, it's hard to get back. Salt or yeast or something like that. Flour, sugar's a little easier. This first ingredient is real easy. You can scoop these back. So again, just kind of taking my time there. I'm going for 553 grams. Your numbers will be different based on your bread machine and your recipes. 553 is the amount of flour I wanted in the bread maker. Now I will push the tare button again. It goes back to 0. Then I will add the next ingredient. Again, no scoops, no bowls, no measuring cups. Dry milk for me is 8 grams. This is pretty easy to get quick. And you can either pour directly or use a little scoop. That's the dry milk. You need so again, finish with the ingredient, reset it to 0. Now you can now add your sugar. And for me, that's 48 grams. All right, sugar's in. Zero that out. Next ingredient is salt. Now salt I have to be a little careful with. You really don't want to overdo it on the salt because it's hard to get back. So I'm just going to, the scoop we have in the salt container, dish that out. In this recipe, this calls for 10 grams of salt. You'll notice I'm not leveling out a teaspoon or a tablespoon or something like that. It's all about the weight. Most bread recipes are going to call for butter. And so what I do is, and it's really best to melt it before you put it into the bread machine. So for my ingredients, I'm looking for 35 grams of butter, which is about 1/3 of a cup. You might find it a little bit differently for your recipes, but I'm going to take that butter, the 1/3 of the cup that I've just cut off, and I'll put that into a little glass bowl, heat it up in the microwave, 28 seconds. So before I put the butter in, one thing I'm going to do is kind of scoop out or make a bit of an indentation. As you'll read from your bread machine instructions, it's nice to have a little hole for the yeast to sit in, especially if you're using this on a timer mode. You want the yeast to be dry, and so you don't want it touching anything that's wet. So I'll add the butter by just pouring in this melted butter into the side there. Now for me, the yeast is harder to measure. It's only 1.5, just a few grams. So that's the one measuring that I do with a measuring spoon. This is probably the most important ingredient. I'm experimenting tonight with regular yeast. Most bread machines want to have fast rising. You'll find out for yourself what's worked best for you. Yeast and water combinations tend to be directed by altitude and humidity. So as you know, we have lots of altitude and very little humidity here. You kind of have the opposite there in Makanda. So with that, I'm going to put roughly 1.5 teaspoons of yeast in, and we're going to see with this experiment how that goes. So that's what my bread machine finished product kind of looks like. So most of your ingredients are in. Yeast is in a kind of a pocket or a hole. It's ready to now go into the bread machine. Your bread machine is going to be different than this, but in many ways similar. So you've got this in, and it's got to be, you got to make sure it's securely fastened inside. Close the lid, and then you're going to have some kind of control panel. Different courses is going to allow you to kind of tell it what kind of bread to make. You can tell it to wait and set a timer. You might have some control over the crust, darker versus lighter. But in my case, I'm just ready to get this started. So I'm going to push the button, and it will start doing its thing.